So let's talk about the relationships between athletes and trainers. Joining me now to discuss it, sports psychologist Dr. Caroline Silby, in-session legal analyst and contributor Sunny Hostin, and sports and entertainment attorney Scott Schaefer. Thank you to all of you. Dr. Silby, I want to start with you. I mean, we see workplace relationships, professional turned personal, but James Martin describes their relationship as 24/7. I mean, do you think it's healthy?
Well, the coach-athlete relationship has been fraught with complications for years, and those only intensify when you're talking about at the very elite level. And these relationships, in terms of developing elite athletes, there is so much emotional and physical struggle that goes in to becoming an elite athlete that sometimes that can become distorted. And at the very innocent side of the equation, that can be something like admiration. But then it can become perverse and it can become physical, emotional, and even sexual abuse. So I think when we're looking at a relationship between a coach and an athlete that's then taken to the next level, in this case, a marriage, that relationship is really born out of very confusing beginnings. So I don't think we should be surprised, frankly, when they end and when they end badly.
So, Dr. Silby, I have a question about the control that James Martin had over his wife. I mean, and I don't know that you can actually finish the answer before we have to take a break, but we'll get back to it. Maybe it's unfair, but James Martin has been labeled a misogynist by some because he had this absolute total control over her. Maybe he was, and maybe this was the perfect position for him to be in, to marry this woman he controlled. He managed, he was her mentor. She made lots of money. She supported him, and he slept with her at night. But do you think that it's unfair to say maybe he's a misogynist and that it just kind of goes with the territory?
Well, I don't think it has to go with the territory by any means. I think that is certainly the way that, or it appears that is the way that he decided to approach it. I mean, I think you have to understand kind of the dynamic between the athlete and the coach, which is that most female athletes want to please their coach, or their trainer. And these trainers are often icons in the sport. And look, athletes come and go, but trainers tend to have a long shelf life that can reach 15 years back and 15 years ahead. And so a newcomer to the sport who has little knowledge of the sport, has few connections in the sport, turns her career over to this Bengali trainer. And, for a while, what ends up happening is the vanity, the power, the knowledge of the trainer collides literally with the physical capability, the need to please, and this desire to succeed of the athlete. And what you see happen is success is very often produced. And for a long period of time, things can go on and be terrific until the female athlete kind of starts to embrace her success and really understand it and, frankly, figure herself out. And, the whole process of sport is supposed to be about empowerment and learning about yourself and figuring it out, basically. And when that happens, there very often is this moment in time where an athlete kind of suddenly says, you know what, I want to work off my scorecard now. And it's usually at that moment where acceptance by the trainer is no longer a priority for the athlete, and you see some kind of fracture occur in that coach-athlete dynamic.
Right. It certainly is a complicated relationship. We're going to have more of this discussion when we come back. Stay tuned. And Dr. Silby, sort of picking up on some of what Scott Schaefer just said about the dearth, the lack of quality trainers, and maybe the sport's not as popular today as it was in the 40s and 50s. Do you think that maybe there's a correlation between that drop and the rise in public awareness of brain trauma, traumatic brain injury, in contact sports? I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but could you comment?
Well, yeah, right now it's a extremely important topic that people are discussing is the brain trauma, obviously related a lot to football and what's happening at the NFL level, but all the way down into youth sports. So I think these discussions are good. They're important. We need to have them. These discussions have actually changed the way that brain trauma, especially in young people, is now treated. And so I think we do need to have these kinds of discussions across all sports, and not just football. I mean, some of the data is showing that girls soccer players have a high rate of concussions. And so we need to look at this, and we need to look at the data, and we need to have conversations like we're having today. But I think one of the really important points that everybody's raising here today is kind of the concern over the lack of boundaries that sometimes occur in these coach-athlete relationships. And I feel very strongly, and I know that there are certainly exceptions to this, but typically when a coach-athlete relationship becomes about something other than sport performance, there's emotional damage and fallout that occurs. And it can take people years to recover from that fallout and from that emotional damage. And so I think we have to have the kind of discussions that we're having today. They're extremely important, and we have to be able to help educate coaches and trainers and have systems to do that, because at the elite level, it isn't just a physical sport. And as much of a combat sport and a physical sport that boxing is, boxers themselves will describe their sport as a physical kind of chess. And they see it as a psychological and tactical as much as they see it as physical. And so it really is important to get people trained and get people educated on what are appropriate tools for motivation, and that we always at the core have to remember when we're working with athletes that they're not just champions. You know, these are people. They're human beings with emotions. And we need to take great care to develop both, not just the champion.